So how's it been recording in the studio with us? You enjoyed it?
Yeah. I think the highlight for me is that I don't have to get a bunch of equipment set up at my own house.
Isn't that nice?
It's nice. You guys set up for me.
And you just sat here.
Just sat here, watched.
Like talent.
Yeah.
The real talent.
Like guest.
Real talent behavior from Zach.
Totally.
Real
I showed up half an hour before we record. It's good. That was better than some people. But
Yeah. I really appreciated that. We ready to kick this off
Let's
for
do
today?
it.
All right, cool. From VinePair's New York City headquarters, I'm Adam Teeter.
And I'm Joanna Sherino.
And I'm Zach Jabal.
And this is the VinePair podcast. All right, we got one more all together.
Right.
Before we're going to go back to us here, sitting across from each other.
In Seattle, Washington.
Me in my little box.
Zach in a dungeon.
Yep.
So what have you been reading?
I just realized I maybe have to start calling that room my hex dungeon.
It is.
Oh my God.
That's good. That's
The
good.
Hive.
Okay.
Anyhow.
The Hive.
So I'm going to talk about 7 things you need to know about Malort because there's only one thing you need to know about Malort, and it's gross.
I've had it.
I wanted to talk about this piece too.
Why? Okay, go.
You say more than I had to say because to me, I just it's an interesting story, but anytime I read about Malort, I just can't get the taste of it out of my brain, and that's not a good thing to me. I mean, I'm glad I tried it, but I'm also glad that I tried it in the past and not in the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad we tried it.
I'm glad I tried it, but I don't think it's the best thing I've ever had in my life.
No one thinks it's the best thing they've ever had in their life.
But
Yeah.
I also I'm not a Midwesterner and I'm not a Chicagoan, so I don't have the pride for it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's
Right.
I think it's such pride that they have for it, which that's nice.
But I think it's there's a piece of it which is do you have I don't know if this happens with either of you with your spouses, but sometimes this happens to me with my wife, and it happened, you stepped in with my sister too, where they'd be like, this smells gross, come here. And they that thing where they're someone experiences something disgusting, but the way they appreciate it is they make someone else also have to then experience it.
I don't want to come here now.
And I'm I don't have that. If I experience something gross, I'm not trying to pass that on to the next person.
Aren't you curious though?
Well, I will try it perhaps if I'm the person being asked, but I don't get the impulse of, here is this objectively disgusting thing. I now want other people I care about to experience it. I'd rather just take the garbage out.
I love it.
Anyhow,
I was just shocked that we didn't have it on the site already.
Right.
I
Yeah,
need to
me
know
too.
about Malort all these years.
Yeah, I know.
And Malort of all things.
Right.
Lord.
I'm
People out there,
fascinated by
the
it.
SEO, they're clamoring more Malort, more
Yeah.
Malort.
It is now made in Chicago once again.
Right.
Good for it.
Yes.
What about you?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
You're trying
and-
to piggyback on that one.
Yeah. I liked our essential bottles of gin piece from Rich Manning that we published. Fun fact is that we haven't published too much in between recordings, everybody.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We're leaving the one feature for Adam to talk about.
Well, the only reason we haven't is because we wanted to maximize Zach being here together,
Yeah.
so we're recording quickly.
That's true. I'm not
episode.
spending a week and a half in New York.
Exactly.
Folks. Sorry to break it to you.
So I liked the Mount Rushmores of Chardonnay.
California Chardonnay.
Yeah.
Hannah wrote that one. Compiled it, really.
Compiled,
Yeah.
wrote, added hers. Added hers. They're very Hannah.
Yep.
Not in a bad way, by the way. I don't want anyone.
Yeah.
I think I liked your choices. There were some that I was happy to see on the list. I think not enough people said Au Bon Clement. I thought that I think there's 2. Too many people said Sandy. I think that's a mistake. I mean,
It's very subjective. What would your 4 be?
I also big ups to the Somm from Shea
Tyra
Fifi,
Johnson.
for saying Ron Bauer.
Yes.
Again, and I love what she said, which is it's not a wine for me, but you can't say it's the Mount Rushmore of Chardonnay and not put it here. It literally defined an entire style of Chardonnay for a huge portion of the public. And that's a Somm that knows their shit, because that's a Somm that's not afraid to say, I recognize why this is important. And that's what we need. That's the kind of Somm we need more of in America.
Right.
She's at top restaurants in New York. She recognizes that.
Well, what did she say? Her growing up, her friends' moms
all drank it.
Right.
And that's a wine people like. It would be saying, trying to pretend. I feel like when beverage professionals try to pretend these wines don't exist, or never, you're just doing yourself a disservice too as a wine professional.
Or even that in a lot of these cases that wines, even other wines on this list, were in some way, shape, or form influenced by Ron Bauer.
100%.
Whether they were attempting to kind of copy the style or very consciously doing something very different, they're still like there's a gravitational field that was created by Rombauer and other very oak-forward Chardonnays that to pretend that didn't happen, pretend that doesn't still matter, yeah, I think would have been like with these kinds of pieces, to me, that's where the idea of like you have to look at the history and the influence.
What's
and it's
historically
not,
influential, right? Yeah.
It wasn't for
What are your favorite
winemaker's favorite California Chardonnays.
Yeah.
Like that's a different piece.
It's a different problem.
And that's not what, as far as I see, as in having written a couple of these, like that wasn't to me the point. I wanted what is important, what lasts historically. Hopefully most of them are good, but doesn't have to be.
I mean, that's why I feel like Alain Climat is important, because it sort of it showed that there was this other area of California that could make extremely high quality Burgundian style Chardonnay. Yeah. I think I was surprised I didn't see more Montelena.
Right.
There was 2 or 3 people that said.
Yeah.
But again, like, I'm sorry guys, it won Judgment Paris. Like it put the fact that should be on everyone's. And yeah, I mean, I guess for me the Sandy one, because of In Pursuit of Balance.
Yeah.
Right. That's sort of the idea that it was like the beginning of that movement. But I don't really think it fully did. Again, if we're saying Mount Rushmore, like these people, these are just very historically important push forward. That for me was a tough one, even though, it's a wine that I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
But I don't think of it as being like
iconic in that way.
Iconic, yeah. Kistler. That's one I think of as being iconic too, which a lot of people said.
They do. Yeah.
So that was a fun piece. The conversation I wanted to have today is based on a comment that was made to me recently at an event by someone that's worked in alcohol beverage for a very long time, all the way up to running one of the largest alcohol companies. And one of the things they talked about was they, a few years ago, while had always working in New York, basically moved to another part of America and would commute back and forth here. But like where they moved was Texas. And one of the things they were talking to me about was that like what it both made them very good at their job, but also showed them how much in the bubble like marketers, especially marketers based in New York, San Francisco, Chicago are. So what she was talking about was that like, they had all these brands at the company she was at, and always the marketing plans would come through with the focus and the themes, et cetera, being basically like what those marketers were interested in.
Coastal
elites.
Yeah.
But for her, she would go back to Texas and like talk to her kids, et cetera, go to her colleges. Like that was not how any of them were consuming the products that this company was selling.
Right.
And they were consuming a lot of those products. For example, like one of the things she talked about was, this big cocktail forward focused campaign for a whiskey that they owned. And then she would go back home and like everyone was doing whiskey and Coke. Like that is how it was being consumed.
Right.
And like they were not interested in making it as cocktails or whatever. And like that is where the volume was coming from. And she was like, and we never even entertained doing a whiskey and Coke campaign.
Right.
Like it was like not even thought of, because the marketers are much more interested in, this high-end cocktail campaign with bartenders or whatever. And she's like, and we really didn't know our customer. And I think we talked about that a lot. And she said same thing of like another brand, because at the time she realized one of the brands was like really into like pop music. So they started like surrounding pop music, which is like, but actually the consumer for this, when we like really looked at the data, was like not a pop music listener.
Right.
They were like someone that was much more into like country. Right. But like the opportunities that the brand manager were. And so I just think so interesting to think about how so many of these campaigns and her like, vocalizing that back to me come from just whoever happens to be controlling the brand at the time and what they're interested in, and not necessarily what's good for the brand. I think it also shows how little research actually happens, or how little the research that even happens, you maneuver to make it fit your narrative of what you want to do, right? You're really interested in winter sports or like live music or camping or whatever, right? And so then all of a sudden when you're on the brand, like that's because you're a consumer of the brand, obviously, when you work on the brand, right? So then you think you're the brand, but oftentimes you're the furthest thing from the normal consumer or the largest consumer group of the brand.
Or it's very aspirational, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some brands that like it just doesn't work for, right? Like you can push as long as you want, using a certain whiskey maybe in cocktails, but like if that whiskey is known to the majority of consumers as a whiskey and Coke whiskey, it's just never gonna
Right.
You're just gonna, it's gonna be failed campaign after failed campaign. Like the numbers will still go up, which is a lot of the ways that marketers will say they did well, but maybe just because people still really like whiskeys and Coke,
right?
Not because like anything you did to surround the brand with like high-end cocktail culture and the old fashioned or Manhattan or something.
Right. Well, I think this reminds me a little bit of a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago in response to a couple of the New York Times editorials, where sometimes I think you see this problem in media too, where people confuse their own preferences for like a broader, let's say, cultural sentiment or like consumer sentiment. And that can happen with anyone any one person is going to have a hard time sort of generalizing and extrapolating about a huge, a very popular brand, all of the like many different kind of demographics and people that like to consume it. And if they say like, well, most of our drinkers are like me, that's probably wrong. Like whoever you are, it's hard for you to nail that. And so, there's this tendency to look at what do I like to do, or how do I interact with this brand, or how do those things work in my day-to-day, and think, well, that's what we should base a campaign around. But I also think the other piece of this is, and it's really interesting that you say that, you think a lot of data is either not being collected or not out there, because I think this is a thing that like we've seen in other areas of business and in life, where actually when you take the time to go out and try to produce this information and use it, you find often some surprising things and actionable things, but that requires like, I don't want to say hard science, but it requires like you actually doing surveying and things like that. Yeah. Not just sort of saying like the brand manager or whoever being like, oh yeah, well, I was at this event and what I heard from, 30 consumers was this. And so there's my sample. And there I am like making decisions based on that. It's like, well, you probably need to do a better job, a more robust job of collecting information if you're going to try and use it to make decisions. You probably should if you're operating, a large brand.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of this, right? Like, I think it is appropriate for a brand to want to innovate in their marketing, right? You can't necessarily always do the same thing over and over again. Like, if whiskey and Coke is what's working for your brand, maybe you don't want to do a whiskey and Coke campaign.
Right.
Right, because it's not going to grow your audience or your consumer base or whatever. But I also don't think you can pick something that's completely out of left field.
Right.
That's not going to connect with your consumer base at all. So you have to be informed in your innovation, right? And I think that a lot of that is doing, surveys and collecting data and identifying something that's like a smaller part of your brand that you can like lean into and tap into.
I think the reason this doesn't happen that often is a lot of people in the business don't want to know the answer, because if the answer conflicts, it may not be the actual like demographic group or messaging, et cetera, that they're interested in. Right. So then all of a sudden, like working on that brand, especially when we're talking about the big companies, isn't that interesting to them anymore. Right. And I think one of the things that this person was talking to me about as well is just this major reluctance by lots of people. And she was before alcohol in major CPG, running some of the biggest like CPG brands in the world, and then doesn't even come from America, right? So is from another country originally, and was saying that like there's a major reluctance that she's seen even here amongst like marketers to go to the middle. Right. Just to see what's happening in middle America. And so then there's like a lot of talk in the office that like, for example, no one's drinking, but then when she goes to Texas, the bars are packed and everyone is consuming, and like she doesn't see the messaging that we're like talking about till we're blue in the face here about, low ABV and taking nights off, and like that's not happening there. Right. And the only reason, and if it does happen, it is 100% economic. Right. And like I saw this really interesting article recently. I still subscribe to a publication from Alabama to follow Auburn sports, right? Which like, I think is worthwhile pursuit. I don't care about the Alabama politics, but there was like a headline on the front page that like Huntsville, Alabama restaurants are empty, right? Why? Not because of
money,
the shutdown,
right?
Yeah.
Because it's literally where NASA's headquartered,
right?
Sure.
So like you have a majority of that city that are government workers that aren't getting paid. So like all the restaurants are right now empty. So it's monetary. Yeah, exactly. It has nothing to do with like every scientist at NASA decided that like they should stop drinking and going out to eat. It's 100% monetary. And that's kind of what she's talking about. But she's like, but here, when I would be in these meetings, the only way that any marketer on her team would want to talk about, you know, this decrease in drinking was through the lens of low ABV, sober, curious movement. And she was just like, that anywhere that I would travel outside of New York, that was not why that was happening.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there is this relative, like, to go see that. Maybe you don't think those places are as interesting or you're not interested in them, but that is, I think, what you should do as a marketer, especially if that is where if your customer base is there. And I'll tell you that for the majority of like brands out there, that is where your customer base is. Like New York is, or LA or San Francisco are like very small markets actually in the long term, right? They're big and they are very, very, very competitive. There's like no one brand, maybe Malort owns Chicago, but otherwise like, there's no one brand that can control these markets or have the dominance that the brands can have in, you know, smaller regional places. And that's why it's important to go see them and not just try to create something that is in your image and your image alone.
Well, and that's the point, is there's like two different but self kind of reinforcing reasons that you might want to branch out. One is, as you said, your clientele, a lot of your customer base, if you're a large brand, is not going to be found in any one city or any one region, right? If you're a national brand, being a national brand means you're kind of everywhere. And yes, you might have parts of the country or even individual cities where you are bigger and smaller. Yeah. But, you know, if you're a widely available brand, you're going to be everywhere. And so you have to have not just an idea of what the customer base in those different places wants, but you also have to support them. And support means a lot of different things, right? You're supporting, you know, maybe it's the distributor or the sales team in that city or region that's you know, not as often visited. You're connecting with consumers who maybe don't get a lot of that kind of connection. And I think, and more to the point, as you said, Adam, the competition is just less fierce. And that to me is the thing that's always baffled me a little bit about, you know, when I talk to, you know, wine producers, I talk to people who work for big distribution companies, things like that. And we talk sometimes about, you know, certainly events in Seattle, but they talk to me about events in other places, including in New York. And, you know, the thing I've started hearing more recently from wine brands is like, if they want to do like a trade tasting or do something, they're being told, you got to pay us $10,000 just to come in the door at a restaurant. Like
in New York.
For like a lunch for, I don't know, 30 people. Wow. And it's like, you know, that's not an amount that the restaurant is charging. If, you know, you or I called up and said, hey, we want to do a private lunch for 20 people, they're not going to tell you it's, you know, $500 a person probably. And so it's like this whole thing where so many of these places are so, there's enough demand to do those kinds of things. And I think there's a sense of, we're not going to really go out of our way to accommodate this. Conversely, if you take that same event to, you don't have to go to the middle of nowhere. You just have to go to
Atlanta.
Atlanta or
Charlotte,
Nashville. Exactly. Like any of these places where there's just not the same level of touch from the big brands, the big distributors, and the, you know, kind of things that move the needle there. Like it's easier to move the needle in those cities. And those cities, as you said, like they're not as big as New York, but they are big. And more to the point, as you said, Adam, like there's in a lot of these places, there is really strong drinking culture. There's strong restaurant industries and scenes. And so, you know, you can make the numbers go up easier, I think, in a lot of these
opportunities there.
There's just and yet, but it comes back to this question of we're not like geniuses for thinking of this, you know. So the question that kind of has to come back to is like, why aren't people doing this? And to me, I think there's sort of two possibilities that I think of. One is the thing that you've described, which is candidly, they don't want to go there.
Yeah, 100% is
they just, and I'm surprised in a way, but I also think there's a lot of people I meet in that space who just like, they see their job as being like going from New York to Miami to Los Angeles to Chicago, you know, kind of a few other places. And like, it's someone else's problem who moves product.
It's the distributor or sales team's problem.
Oklahoma City, that's someone else's game. I have to set the trends in the biggest cities, and that's going to trickle out. And that is the other piece of it that I'm curious about, and I think we should talk a little bit about, which is that actually true? I think historically it was true. I have my doubts in some ways about whether, even if you were to be successful, more successful than you currently are in New York, in Chicago, in LA, in Vegas, wherever, does that permeate out in the way that it used to? And I'm not sure it does.
I don't think it does. I just think the way that trends work these days with social media and influencers and content creators and all of that stuff, like it's far less likely that a trend that takes hold in New York is going to diffuse across the country into all of these other
or a
markets.
trend from somewhere else could become huge everywhere. Like you could have, I mean, I don't know what the next thing would be, but like you could have some viral trend on TikTok about drinking, I don't know, pick, some random, gin or something. And like that could be a person in New York City. But it just as easily could be someone in, Albuquerque. Like who knows?
I mean, I think we wrote a fun piece about this. Actually, it's a good example, which is this explosion of the soda shops in Utah.
Dirty soda.
Dirty sodas, right? And that was something that was happening in Utah for a very long time because of the, Mormon culture. A lot of people don't drink. And no one really knew about it because media was focused on the coast.
Right.
But now with social media, people in Utah are posting about these dirty sodas, and other people are like, this is really interesting. This is cool. And now you have them opening in New York City.
Yep.
Right.
People are like, oh, I would like to try dirty soda. And that's why it can come from anywhere at this point. But I do want to sort of also address a point that you made that I think is the reasoning that people will say for like why they do the campaigns in their own image and why I think they don't work. And the reasoning is always to open the category, right? To grow the category, to grow. But first of all, I think that often is a very easy catch-all to say without having done any research as to whether or not that will actually grow the category. And then often I also think it lacks any awareness of whether or not the thing you want to do is how someone would consume in the first place or where they would consume. Like I think I'll give a very stupid example, but like let's claim, for example, that there's a brand that wants to do football because they're all into football, but you recognize that like actually, I don't know, maybe it's a super high-end gin brand that like has a martini campaign, but no one drinks martinis while they're tailgating. Well, besides like 2-3 people, maybe they're British, et cetera, right? No one drinks martinis when tailgating, but they want to do a martini tailgating campaign.
Right.
That is the dumbest shit ever, right? That doesn't work.
Don't try it.
Right. Whereas like I think, as we talked about more wine brands should be doing tailgating campaigns because we know that people drink wine while they tailgate, just like they drink beer and they drink seltzer and they drink whiskey Cokes, right? But those are things that are really like, where actually is this consumed and how would it be consumed, right? I think one of the things we've talked about before as well, that's like a clear understanding of that was like Veuve Clicquot and the understanding of like skiing and polo.
Right.
Like, yes, when people go to ski and when people go to watch polo, they want to drink champagne.
Right.
They do. And like they're happy drinking champagne in the middle of the ski adventure, at the end of the ski adventure, while they sit there and watch a bunch of horses run around with really rich people on the backs of them. Like that's their into. They get it. Like that's high-end luxury culture. But like a miss for Veuve could have been something like, I don't know, WWE. Right. Oh, this is culturally important right now. We're going to sponsor it too. Like that is not for that brand a fit, right? No one wants to go sit and watch WWE and drink Veuve Clicquot. And I think that, but you could have had a brand manager at some point in time, who knows, who was like really into WWE.
Yeah.
And was like, I want to do this. And I watch WWE all the time. And I drink champagne when I watch WWE because you work on the brands, you probably get a lot of it. Right. But it doesn't actually fit.
Right.
And I thought that's why I think that this conversation I had was so fascinating, because it just validated for me all these things that we've talked about that I thought were actually true, that actually are. Right.
Yeah.
You have someone that literally has been the head of a major organization saying, like, yeah, like this is 100% what we in leadership, as you come up through leadership, fight against every day, is trying to get the brand managers to not just do things that they think are cool,
right,
but actually do things that will actually work for the brand.
Right. And I think that's like the point of opening new markets and stuff like that, is more like, it would seem to me that you need to have sort of a logical chain from where you currently are that connects. So like, I think an example of a brand that in the past has done a really good job of understanding its market and how to expand is Modelo. And like we saw Modelo's, partnership with MMA. You see it obviously like heavily involved with Buffalo Wild Wings, and you could see them start to look and be like, you could continue to see them be like, okay, well, what are some adjacent things? Maybe areas where we're not currently, but we understand a good chunk of our core demographic. These are some of the things they like. Let's move and be in some of the other spaces that they want to be in, or associate with the other things they want to be in. And so I don't think it's that you have to just run the same exact play over and over again.
Yeah.
But, I guess to continue this football analogy, you also can't run like a flea flicker every play.
Yeah.
Like there has to be some connective tissue between what you are currently doing and what your brand identity is, if it has one, to where you want to take it. And that's where like, the Veuve Clicquot and skiing and polo makes sense to me. But I also think like you can't look at, not every luxury product also fits into those spaces. And that's the thing too, where it's like, I don't know enough about how ski resorts operate, but I think like there's even within there's a lot of stratification because like there are the people who are, the ski resort is like the big thing for them in the year. And they're going to have like a really special vacation or trip. And then there are the people who are like at a ski resort every weekend. And like, that's just their life they're in the mountains for the winter. And those people are going to respond to even a brand like Veuve Clicquot differently, right? Because there's going to be a set of people who look at that and they're like, this is the sign of that I've made it. And then there are people who are going to be like, what else do you have? And you have to understand your brand. You have to understand how you play into those spaces. And I think that is one of those things where, it's funny to me because you meet brand managers and on the one hand, and this is a gross generalization, I apologize, some of them have tremendous command of like a lot of the details of their product, right? They know this backstory, they know how it's made, they know a lot about it. But they also sometimes seem to lack an understanding, as we've been talking about, of like how people actually drink this thing.
Right.
Yep.
They know how they drink it.
Yes. Well, for one, I actually think I met a shocking number of brand managers who like candidly, they're like whatever on their
Don't
product.
like their brands.
Because I mean, for one, you don't always want to drink the same thing over and over again. Anyhow, they have to drink it for work, at events, things like that. So on their private time, I get it. That's not what you're going to gravitate towards. But also like, there's lots of brands out there with managers, and we would all agree, not every single brand that's managed is good or is that good. And so you do get a lot of burnout on that side. And then I think the other piece of it is, like I said, it's just like the person who consumes it for a job and in that setting and is that kind of person, I think you have to work really hard to not lose sight of what the sort of norm is around that drink for most people.
Well, you said it before. It's understanding the core demographic.
Right. So,
and I feel like that doesn't happen half the time.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I think there's a really great example of that there, though, that I'll share because
we encounter this a lot.
Yes.
Right. When we're working with brands on campaigns that they want to do.
Yes. I think one of the best examples currently of understanding the customer and that leading to insane success is our spirits brand of the year, Lalo. So remember when Lalo was telling us this when he was here a few weeks ago?
Yes.
So I think this is an incredible lesson.
Following your demo. This is really interesting.
He basically calls it following the customer. Right. So basically when they started Lalo, they launched it only in Austin. Right. And they started doing a lot of research around who that person was. And they realized because of the pack, I mean, probably where they sold it into, probably who was attracted to the packaging, the price point, et cetera, that they were getting a higher net worth consumer. Right. So then they started doing research as, okay, where is the place out of any place that this consumer, what's the large percentage of them, where do they vacation? And they realized it was Aspen. Okay. So the next market they went to after Austin was Aspen because they were following the Austin customer from Austin to Aspen. Right. Then in Aspen, they were like, what is the other large base of people that are here in Aspen besides coming from Texas? Oh, they're coming from New York and the Hamptons. So then they came to New York and the Hamptons. Yep. And then they started saying, where is the largest demographic of New Yorkers going when they're not in New York? Oh, they're going to Miami. Right. And what are they all interested in? So if you look like what Lalo sponsors, they sponsor like F1 and tennis. And it's not just because they're interested in it, it's because this high net worth consumer, that's what they do. Right.
Sorry,
that's where they go to.
Also in like St. Bart's and something?
And yeah. So then they were like, so then they were also like, where do the people, all of these people in this group, where do they go in the cold season if they're not in Aspen? They go to St. Bart's. They're not in any other Caribbean island, but they are in St. Bart's. And they are the #1 tequila in St. Bart's.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That is
wild. Why? Because they followed the customer. Yeah. And so they wanted to make sure that everywhere that their customer went, they would see Lalo. Right. But they're not trying to then also be in Auburn, Alabama. Right. There's not a large enough percentage of their customer that is also in Auburn, Alabama, or that is also, I don't know, interested in baseball. Right. There wasn't that huge crossover, even if maybe Lalo's a huge baseball fan. I'm not sure. Right. That's not what they did. It was instead being very hyper focused on who the customer was and then understanding every single thing that they were involved in. And that is how they have grown and strengthened the brand. And then, yes, they brought more customers in and they found other things where the customers are, but it's this fanaticism on following the customer and being every single place that they are and at all the events they would go to, because that strengthens the brand. So it basically is like a reinforcement to you, right? Oh shit. Like I encountered Lalo in Austin, but they're also in Aspen where I like to go, where I feel very successful when I go.
My favorite resort.
And my favorite resort. It must be a fucking successful brand. Like
Right.
that's how you build that awareness of like, this brand is high end.
Well, what do they say? Like, you have to see a product however many times before you buy it the first time,
Yeah.
right? Like, so just being in front of those people in those different settings is probably hugely valuable. This also reminds me of a thing that I was told by not technically a brand manager, but someone in a similar space that I'd totally forgotten this story until just now. So it reminded me. And they were telling me that one of the things they do with the Instagram account for that brand is when they follow someone back, right? So someone follows brand X, they follow them back, and they have like a couple people on their team whose job it is to go through and like look at that person's profile and just be like, maybe not every single person, but certainly when they get a chance to, and they're like, same kind of idea. Like, who is this person? I'm trying to get a sense of them. Why do they care enough about this brand of whatever to follow it, to maybe have commented or liked or whatever. And then from that, they're like pulling some interesting information. They're saying like, oh, okay, well, what else does this person like? What else do they do? I don't know if they've been quite as deliberate as Lalo was about like, okay, we're going to like place our product in certain markets specifically because we've created this kind of archetype of our consumer. But it was like, okay, this information is out there. I mean, again, that's the thing, right? Like, whether you're getting it through social media, whether you're getting it through other kinds of survey data, et cetera, like it's very easy, maybe possibly too easy sometimes to get, this kind of personal, generalized data about your consumer base and to work from it. And again, it's more just like, so why aren't people?
Yeah.
And sometimes it comes back to like, they might not know how to do it, or they might not know better, or they might be like, they just might not care to.
Yeah, or like I said, they may not be that interested in who that customer actually is,
Right.
or going to those places, and it's more interesting to them to get to sponsor the NHL because
Right.
they're really into hockey than to sponsor, I don't know, the NFL where the customer actually is, right? I think there's probably some crossover there, but you know what I'm saying.
And one of those is more expensive to sponsor than the other. There is a challenge.
It's also
there.
about dollars.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, anyways, I just thought it was this would be a fun conversation to have because, like I said, it had never been. While we've all had this assumption before, I'd never had someone
Right.
that had been really running something very important for a very long time say like, yeah, this actually is something we fight against all the time.
Yeah.
And I know we've got brand managers who listen. So
Yeah.
we promise we're not trying to just, shit on you all.
I'm not at all. I'm not at all.
Yeah. So if you've got stories to tell us about like things you've done that have worked or that you think are excited about, like places you've been with your brand that, we don't give you enough credit for, podcast@vinepair.com. Tell us. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. If other people have stories like the Lala one, like I think that's, it's great to hear. We would love to hear it. And yeah, Zach, we'll see you in your own studio,
Right.
On Monday.
Have a nice weekend.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for listening to the VinePair podcast, the flagship podcast of the VinePair Podcast Network. If you love this podcast, please leave us a rating or review wherever it is that you are currently listening to it on. It really helps other people discover the show. Also, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your colleagues. Basically, tell anyone about the VinePair podcast. It's always very appreciated, especially by Joanna. The podcast is hosted by myself, Adam Teeter, our editor-in-chief, Joanna Sciarrino, and Zach Jabal, former sommelier from Seattle, Washington, as we all know. It is edited by Darby Seaside. Theme music also by Darby Seaside. Art for the podcast by Daniel Grinberg. VinePair was co-founded by myself and Josh Mallon. Thanks so much again for listening, and we will see you again the next time you listen to an episode. If you made it all the way through these credits, I again consider you a super fan.